Luke here, if you didn't know. So today, just going to go over some Boston stuff, wrap this up with you guys. A lot of you ran. There was a lot of ups and downs with this, so it'd be nice to just go through it and kind of what I saw and all that good stuff. So I see some of you have left some questions here, which is excellent. Let's see, we're right here. Also, I did put the presentation up. You should be able to follow along with that, with what I'm going through today. So just so again, Boston 2017, for many people it was a tough day. For others, it was a pretty good day. So, I was just looking through Facebook and all that stuff and just talking to different athletes. I was actually surprised how many people had good days, because initially it seemed like everybody just had a pretty rough one. But anyway, let's jump in and go through this real quick. All right, so snapshot of the day. We were looking at sunny skies, very sunny out there, which is not the best for us marathoners. I don't know about you, but my face was sunburnt, my shoulders were sunburnt. Definitely got some sun out there. Temps reaching mid 70s. One of my athletes emailed me and said that they saw that Natick had gotten up into about 80 degrees, which I'm not sure what time that was, but I finished roughly 12:30. So I'm going to guess that between 1 and 2 is probably the high for the day. And then it actually kind of got colder, as we'll talk about here. So my start temp was 68 to 70 at 10 a.m. So that means you all were at least that. Some of you probably started and it was in the low 70s. So if you remember back to what we were talking about just before the race, once we got to 65 was kind of our cutoff for having to adjust anything. And then after that, once we got above that, we'd probably have to talk about adjusting a little bit. So unfortunately, that temp just kept creeping up over the last couple of days, and especially into the day before. And then we also had a non-cooling tailwind, which, if it's coming out of the east, it's usually going to be colder at Boston because it's coming off of the ocean. And a headwind's just going to cool you anyway. That tailwind is going to obviously push you along a little bit, but it's also going to make it feel warmer than what it was too. So, and we talked about that going into it as well. So we knew that was going to kind of be an issue. But having it warmer on top of that definitely did not help. And then for some of you, I feel like if you were out there after 2:00, you probably got a little bit of that front coming through. Because I remember when I went outside from the hotel, maybe like 3:00, it was definitely cooler than when it finished, and it was starting to get cloudy too. So you also had that to deal with. Impact that had on us was really split on. Some people had A, B, and C goals, which I thought was great. Training into it, you're obviously going in with the idea of an A goal, but seeing, especially overnight, that weather definitely kept creeping up, and we got into that kind of that zone where we were going to have to adjust. And by the looks of it, many of you still. You did that. You settled on a B or C goal. So some of you, it was time, or one of my athletes, Dan, basically was looking at just trying to run his best Boston time ever, in which he did. But I think just making those adjustments for some of you definitely helped, and it definitely eased going into that. Because I think by the time we got up in the morning, many of us realized that it wasn't going to be that PR day we were really hoping for. And on the other hand, some of you emailed me, and I was kind of in the same boat on this. And that was really just kind of, hey, I came here to run this time, and I'm just going to keep going for it, right? So some of you had the original goal and just kept with that, and just kind of rolled the dice on that to see what happened. And for some of you, it didn't end up too bad, and for others, I think we'll talk about some of the time stuff here moving on. But I think for some of you, I got some were like 20, 30, 40 minutes slower than what they had planned on, and that was definitely something that we saw. But ideally, you were okay with the potential consequences, knowing that the weather was what it was, knowing that the course is what it is, and all that. So, and I think a lot of you were. I mean, from what I saw, most of you were like, hey, I toughed it out, and it just wasn't my day, which is ultimately kind of how you have to look at things anyway, because Boston's a tough course, and while you can PR on it, and some people did PR on it, it's a tough course to begin with, and the weather really just made it a little bit tougher. So the feedback I got was from everybody, and this is from people who I didn't coach too. This is just from people I talked to in Boston and ran into that evening and saw at the after party and stuff like that. So, but much earlier cramping and fatigue, definitely saw that. Like you can start to usually see carnage starting at like 16, 18 miles in any marathon. And a lot of your feedback was that had set, earlier, like 8 to 10 miles in, and then much more severe mental fatigue as far as not thinking clearly, really getting just the idea of wanting to give up a little sooner, which I think it's all related. I mean, if you're feeling fatigued sooner, and that's really technically the easier part of the course, and then you get to starting at 16 when you're coming out of Wellesley and you start getting into the hills and Newton and stuff, and you're already feeling worse than you anticipated, and then you get into the hardest part of the course, is definitely a point where you're going to be like, that mental barrier of just giving up is a lot lower at that point. And that's not a knock on anybody. I think that's just not having, being dehydrated more than you were, just having that severe, onset of fatigue a little earlier than what we thought. It just makes it easier to get through. To giving up is the wrong word, but just kind of like, oh my gosh, this is a lot tougher than what I was anticipating. And trust me, I think I was in that same boat too, because I was more in the boat of really just being like, I'm here to run. I was definitely here to run 220. I still kind of went after that and was just going to see what happened. And then I was in the same boat where I got to like 16, 18. I was like, oh my gosh, this is, things slowed down real quick. And then you were kind of fighting for every mile there. So we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But those are the two biggest things I saw with people, was much earlier cramping and fatigue, and much more severe mental fatigue, and earlier on as well. So the physiological consequences, we're talking about, we're already creating a muscle damage from the early downhills. If you were with our Boston group and watched those videos, then we talked about that. Like you're already creating muscle damage by running 26 miles. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, but the downhill is going to just create more damage. And unfortunately, the way that Boston's set up is that the first part of the course is downhill. So you're creating that damage early on, and then you get into the uphills later on. And so you just kind of have that double whammy. It's really the worst case scenario for muscle damage. So we're already creating that, just the way the course is set up. Then it's compounded by the increased effort of the warmth created. So let's say your marathon pace is, let's just say 70% of your VO2 max. Having a temperature automatically in the 70s, that effort's to run the same pace, your effort might now be 75% or 80% of your VO2 max. It's going to be, the effort to run the same pace is going to be higher. And so that's where we're starting to see the fatigue setting in earlier, because to run at a same pace or even run at a slower pace, we're still running at a higher effort. Our percent of VO2 max is going to be higher, which ultimately puts us closer to lactate threshold, which ultimately has, if you look at fatigue, you have two theories on fatigue, and it's really a blend of both. But one's the build-up theory, where you're building up byproducts of breaking down muscle and using energy that you're going to and hopefully people are hearing me. Okay. All right. So hopefully you can hear me. Okay. All right. So some people are hearing me. Okay. So in any case, the warmth created an increased effort, right? So to run the same pace, going to be a slower or a higher effort. The next thing, increased neuromuscular fatigue. I don't necessarily understand this 100%. I was really just reading up on it yesterday, but it really kind of has to do with the idea of the sensory part of the body, where it's going to the skin, and you're getting perception from the skin on how warm it is, and that can mess with the neuromuscular aspect of contraction, things like that. It's basically a self-preservation to some extent, but the idea is that you're having the warmth, and the damage you're creating to the muscle is creating an increased neuromuscular fatigue. So all you need to know on that is that if we're fatiguing faster and the neuromuscular aspect is fatigued as well, which is also going to affect your brain and your thinking, then it's really, think of it as your muscles aren't going to be able to contract as forcefully. As the neuromuscular component gets fatigued, the force of the contractions is going to get weaker and weaker and weaker. And ultimately what happens with that is we have to slow down, right? So if we can't contract our muscles as forcefully, we don't have power enough. It's going to be a slower contraction. It's going to be a less forceful contraction. It means stride's going to shorten up. It means we're ultimately just going to start slowing down. And so if it's warm out and we're already creating that damage, that's going to happen sooner and sooner and sooner. So that's another consequence of it. We talked about the lack of the cooling effect from a headwind, which it doesn't cool us down. Like part of cooling is evaporation from the skin, and a headwind will do that very nicely. Luckily, it wasn't humid too, or else it would have been compounded, because it basically works on how the water vapor. Hey, good, Vic, good. Yeah, that usually helps. So good, glad you're with us. But with when our body cools itself, we're relying on there being less moisture in the air than that's on the top of our skin, and so that's what forces the water to move from where it's very wet to where it's drier, right? So when it's humid, it doesn't work as well, but we just keep sweating and sweating and sweating. So luckily it wasn't humid, but a headwind will help that evaporation along, which will help us cool down a little bit better. But unfortunately, a tailwind just doesn't really do that for us, and so that would lead into the neuromuscular fatigue as well. So it all kind of intertwined with each other and played a role in our increased fatigue. We also talked about increased effort to run the pace or slower, so if we're running at a faster effort, and even though our pace is slower, it doesn't matter, because our energy needs are based on intensity, right? Not necessarily pace. So hills are going to increase our intensity, and the heat is going to increase our intensity. So those are going to increase our glucose needs. So if most of you had a plan for your fuel, and if you're like me though, like you got hot, you were just ultimately trying to, like, I got hot and I didn't feel like eating, I didn't feel like drinking. And so you probably didn't take in as much as you really needed. Or if you had it planned out for a perfect cool day, and it's a warm day and you're burning more fuel, did we account for that? So all of these things I feel like played a role into people fatiguing faster and just having to slow down sooner than what they anticipated. And the end result is shortened time to reach noticeable fatigue. So, many of you talked about experiencing more fatigue pretty early, like 8 to 10 miles on. And then once you got to 16, which unfortunately is where all the hills are, that you're pretty much cooked. And, I was in a pretty similar boat. Like I was cruising right along till about 17. And then I was a little bloated from fueling, and I was starting to overheat a little bit. And then you hit the hills, and it's like, for me too, I didn't really have a lot of people around me. So it was like, I couldn't really see anybody in front of me. There wasn't really anybody catching me. So I was kind of losing my mental clarity a little bit too. And not necessarily giving up, but it was easier to slow down at that point, because you were just trying to say, okay, I'm going to get over the next hill. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And then you just kind of move on from there. But things definitely got very hard for most people at 16. And ideally, you can push that to like 20, 22, and then you can run on heart for the last 4 to 6 miles. But if you have to run purely on heart for the last 8 to 10 miles, that's a lot harder task to ask of anybody. So I think a lot of us are in the same boat on that. All right, so I just want to talk about this to kind of put things into perspective for you, because on Facebook, a lot of people are saying, I adjusted by 5 minutes or this and that. So I wanted to show you like what some equivalent times were. So I was shooting for 220, and at 74 degrees, that would equal to a 223.14. So I'm about 3 minutes off of pace, and I actually ran 223.12. So don't think that I planned that. That was pure luck, I guess, because I was definitely fading at the end. It just happened to work out like that for me. So I pretty much ran my goal time on an equivalent factor. For those running at about the 245 range, at 74 degrees, you're looking at about almost 4 minutes slower. So if you ran in that range, you were pretty solid. 3 hours, same thing. You're a little over 4 minutes off. At 3:30, you're about 5 minutes off. At 4 hours, you're about 5.5 minutes off. And then at 4:30, you're looking at about 6.5 minutes off the pace. So if you were in that kind of window there, you definitely ran very, very strong. And so I would take solace in that a little bit, that you were still very, very close to what, on a better day, you're going to be right into where you wanted to run. The thing with that is, I know a lot of you were like, you did adjust a little bit and you lost much, much more time. And so if you did that, and these are Daniel's numbers, not necessarily mine, but why some fared worse, these adjustments assumed immediate pace adjustment. So like if you were running 230 and you wanted to go back to, say you were looking at 3 hours and you didn't adjust to 304, 305 right away, then that intensity, now you're running at a higher intensity at the same pace. So you're definitely setting yourself up for when hitting the wall sooner. And we know that if we hit the wall, it's going to be tough. So this assumed immediate pace adjustment. So right off the bat, adjusting the pace. Think of the compounding interest effect. So like, a nickel every day, so if you were 5 seconds faster than what you should have been every mile, all of a sudden, boom, it hits you. And then you get it doesn't seem like a little bit because it's just a tiny little bit every time, but by the time you get to 16, 18 miles, boom, and it doesn't end well. It also didn't factor into the Boston course itself, where you might have been okay the first 10, 12 miles where it's mostly downhill and flat, but then as soon as you get into those hills, it just hits you. It hits you like a ton of bricks. So that's why you could have been pretty close, and then boom, you got to the really hard part of the course, and you just didn't have enough in reserves to fight through those hills, and you ultimately lose a bunch of time. And that's why we talk about there's no such thing as time in the bank, because maybe you banked a little bit of time on those first 12, 13 miles, But as soon as that fatigue sets in, the fatigue is going to hit you harder than what it would be to be able to save that time that you had in the bank. We know that for every, if we gain 5 seconds on that first mile, when we start hitting the wall, it's going to be 50 seconds that we're losing. We're not going to slow down 5 seconds because we're 5 seconds fast. That we're going to might slow down 10, 15 seconds for the 5 seconds we were fast. You know what I mean? So you're definitely going to lose more time than when you could put in the bank. And the bigger gap that is, the more time you're going to lose on the back end. So I think that's what happened with quite a few people too. Also, so they have the early excess damage with the downhills, and then the effect of the increased fatigue earlier, like we talked about, starting to hit that fatigue at 16 miles instead of 20 miles. It just did a lot of people in. And then the timing of the hills, of course. Of course, the hills are at the very hardest part physiologically, where we're already starting to get low on reserves. We're already mentally starting to get fatigued. And then boom, we hit that series of hills, and it just makes it a lot tougher to really grind down mentally and just keep grinding on those hills to minimize the damage lost. And it just got away from us on those hills for many people. The effect, the excess dehydration and glycogen depletion. I mean, we were pouring water over our head. We were drinking extra water, but we were losing more than what we could put in. And it just took its toll on a lot of people. So we know, and many of us know this, we hit the wall sooner and we hit the wall harder. So those are all reasons why, instead of losing maybe 5 to 10 minutes, that we'd end up losing 15, 20, 30. Some of you lost 35, 40 minutes on, and a lot of it came on the back end of the course too, once you hit 16. So now those are probably the reasons why that happened. All right, so moving forward. Refer to my blog post, Why Recovery Takes So Long. I know a lot of you want to jump right back into it. And I understand just being upset with how things went, that you think you can jump right back in. Some of you might be able to, especially if why you backed off was more mental than physical. But I think for 99% of us, it was physical and mental. But I think that you really, really want to be careful with how fast you come back. And I've gotten some emails from people I coach and worked with in the Boston group, and, they're looking at late May races and early June races. And that's going to be really about the time you feel pretty rough. Like it kind of all catches up to you. But like somebody emailed me, I can't remember who did, but they want to do something at the end of May, but they recognize that it's not the best situation. And then they realize, and they also said after that, they're going to take a really big break. So obviously there's every situation is going to be different, but I can't urge you enough to be really careful, because this one I think was really hard on a lot of people, and it's going to take a while to recover from the actual muscle damage. And so read the blog post. I'm not going to go into it too long today, but you're talking about muscle damage. You're talking about rebuilding that muscle. It just takes time. And do you really want to jump back into, so many of you were exhausted mentally after this. Just you put in a lot of time, a lot of effort. Your family put in a lot of sacrifice as well. Do you really want to jump right back into that and go through that all again right now? Sometimes you don't want to dig yourself a hole where this one was tough. You come back and you have an okay training segment, but then that race doesn't go as well as you wanted it to. So then you jump back again. People get caught in that cycle of trying to redeem themselves right away. And I feel like that's just a nasty cycle to get involved in. Lick your wounds now, look back, for most of you, it wasn't your training. It was just the day. And, you had a rough day, so there's nothing to prove to anybody. I would say the vast majority of people who ran on Monday didn't have a perfect day. And those who did were probably people who were just before not at a fitness level that they are now. So they were just able to perform because they were just on a completely different level than what they had been used to. And so it wasn't going to matter what the day did. They were going to be able to run better than what they ever have in the past. But those are few and far between. Some people eked out small PRs, and some people ran, B and C goals, which were small victories. But, not too many people had a perfect day. Not everybody had a Jordan Hasay day. And that's nobody's asking you to prove anything. And to me, you'd want to prove it to yourself when you're really, really ready to prove it. And, don't lose faith in yourself because of what the day brought you. So that's my best advice for that. I would really take time off, take at least this week off. Take, if you really want to start doing some light cross training, that's one thing. But like, I'm telling you, I haven't run since the race, and my legs are shot. I'm going to take dogs for a walk tonight, and that's as far as it's going to go right now. I think I need I was going to start cycling indoors, just light spinning, nothing crazy, but just get my legs moving a little bit. And I think I need another couple of days. I might wait till Monday to start doing that. This definitely was a hard one to recover from. So be careful. Yeah, I agree, Vic. Yeah, that's how they go sometimes. And we're going to talk, some of my thoughts on overall on that too. Should I do another marathon right away? If you have the choice, no, I wouldn't do it. Simply based on how tough this was, I think it's going to be tough to recover for many of you. It was just beat us up, right? I would take a mental break because, like I said, a lot of people were pretty bummed. It was an exhausting segment. I mean, for a lot of you who are starting in December, and here we are in mid to late April. It might be best just to take a little step away. The physical grind as well. I mean, for a lot of you too, this is the most mileage and the hardest work you've done. If now, for the marathon, if ever, so you don't want to, you want to let your body recover from that. If you really don't like marathon training, I would definitely take a step back and do something that you really enjoy. So maybe you want to go and just do a bunch of 5Ks this summer and 10Ks, and maybe do a race series in your local area. That's fine. That's something that you're going to enjoy. If you like that training, it's going to make you feel better. And so I would consider that. Evaluate your weaknesses. Take the segment to race a different distance and work on those weaknesses. So maybe you were going for a marathon time that your half marathon PR didn't really line up with. Maybe you take a segment and go chase that half marathon PR, because then, I know a lot of you like to race more than once a segment, and so you get down to a shorter race, and you can race a bunch of 5Ks and 10Ks in a segment. You can do a couple 3 half marathons in a segment if you really want to. So it gives you an opportunity to race a little bit, kind of get back into that mindset, and then it just gives you a break from just the daily grind of marathon training. And I know it definitely wears on all of us. I mean, I trained for Detroit, was going to try to come back a little earlier, got injured a little bit, and then came back for Boston. So really 2 marathons in a row, and really three in about a year, which is because of where the Olympic trials were. And that's too much. Like, I definitely need some time, which leads us into April being the perfect amount of time for an extended recovery. So now you can, if you take time off now, you're not going to start running until end of April, first part of May. You take 4 weeks to build up your mileage and just kind of dink around and work on some strength training and some core and stuff like that. You get into end of May, you start getting into June, and now you've had plenty of time to recover, and you can start thinking about what you really want to do. And if you really want to go into a marathon segment, then you can. If you want to race short stuff all